Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining online this evening. St. Mark's Cathedral acknowledges that we gather on the traditional land of the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people who are still here, and we honor with gratitude the land itself and the life of all the Coast Salish tribes. Let's open with a word of prayer, shall we? Let us pray. Holy One, you call us into the role of stewards and companions in creation. Help us to unfold to your will and all that we might undertake in the name of environmental justice, in the ways that we might address the harm that many people around the globe experience as a result of human-caused climate change, and with courage and wisdom to embrace the opportunities we have at St. Mark's and in our own lives. In it all, may we be guided by your spirit of grace and wisdom. We ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, again, good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. It's a great delight to have this conversation and with our guests, Shelby Ketchum and Stone Fennell, who's not a guest, a St. Mark's parishioner, but brings an expertise. I'll do a brief introduction of them in a moment, but just very briefly, why are we here? This uh, uh, and I might answer that question in three different ways. The first is, as you all well know, that in the last 4 years or so, we at St. Mark's have undertaken a bold step of committing to a goal of being net carbon zero on the St. Mark's campus facilities by the year 2030. And we've been industriously and intentionally going about the work of several of those smaller projects. And one really wonderful project that we undertook last year was replacing all of the high energy incandescent fixtures in the nave attic and replace them with dimmable LEDs. And along the way, I talked with a colleague of Shelby's at Seattle City Light, Elliot Zimmerman, who was just a joy to work with and ended up helping us secure a rebate of close to 25% of the cost of the project, and a sizable amount. So we're very grateful for that. And in my conversations with Elliot, he said, you know, you should really be talking with Shelby, who is at Seattle City Light as an inflation reduction specialist. And Shelby and I and Emily Meeks have had a few conversations. We brought Stone into the last one a few weeks ago. And you'll recognize inflation reduction is not some energy related thing. It's a governmental act of Congress that has some really innovative approaches to electrification and support of solar arrays, especially for religious entities, which is unusual for the government to provide that sort of funding. But Shelby has been helping us navigate the groundwork for that as we look toward the big projects, the capital projects related to how do we get the rest of our natural gas elements of our infrastructure over to an electrified status or renewables like solar. And we're excited about the prospect of perhaps getting some government incentives or rebates in the process. And so that's the origins of this conversation. And really the purpose tonight is for us to invite Shelby from Seattle City Light, and then Stone, who is a St. Mark's parishioner, but also is at University of Washington in the Materials and Science Engineering department as a graduate student there. And they both bring a wealth of knowledge about solar in particular, and then about the Inflation Reduction Act as well. So Shelby and Stone, by way of introduction and expression of gratitude for your presence here, thank you. And we look forward to hearing from you. And Shelby, I think you've got some slides, and I don't know which one of you is taking off first, but take it away.
Yeah, hi everyone. Before we jump in, just one quick introduction. Thank you all for inviting me. I'm really excited to walk through this with you tonight. As Deacon Thomas said, my name is Shelby Ketchum. I'm the Inflation Reduction Act Specialist. I also really want to call out two other people that we've invited. Conceala Crow from the Office of, sorry, my voice already. From the Office of Emergency Management here in Seattle, and then Jin Han, who is with the Progressive Congressional Caucus. They are a large national organization that is helping nonprofits connect with more resources beyond just what Seattle can provide. So just a shout out for them. They're here to provide more resources and try and help everyone kind of get through this. So what we have in store for you all tonight, really quickly, I'm going to share my screen, and we have Stone and I have worked on a presentation, and the way that we're going to structure this for everybody is, all right, can we see the screen or see the slide deck? All right, great. So the agenda is Stone is going to start off by walking through kind of a high-level explanation of what the energy transition is and what electrification and kind of how we address climate change. How do we move off fossil fuels? After the explanation, we'll switch over to me, where I'll provide kind of a high-level overview of some of the different pieces of the Inflation Reduction Act that are available for nonprofits. So with that, we're going to go ahead, and I'm going to hand it off to Stone.
Thank you very much. So what we're looking at right here, we sort of have two figures on this slide. We have the sources of U.S. electricity generation that are in 2022. So what we use in 2022 on the left. And then on the right, we have an image of the planned additions to the grid and things that we took out of the grid. So in general, we have an understanding that the global fossil fuel supply is limited, and the more we use up our supply, the more we contribute to climate change. So we want to transition before we run out of fossil fuels, because if we run out of fossil fuels before we've transitioned out of them, then we don't have the powering for the different construction manufacturing facilities that will be needed to make that transition. So that would be very bad. So we want to get started on that now. And very promisingly, you can see the vast majority of additions to utility scale electrical capacity have been renewable. And so generally, from the sort of the policy and finance side, what we're looking to do is stimulate the demand for solar, and then have that lead to an increase in production capacity, which will lead to cheaper panels, which will lead to more demand, which will lead to more production, and that'll sort of hopefully cause a beneficial cycle of solar production. So we can move to the next slide and see that we've actually already got this wheel turning pretty well so far. So I want to everybody to take note. This looks maybe a little bit linear. This is a logarithmic graph. So these are exponential drops in price for lithium-ion batteries and solar modules, which are kind of some pretty significant cost components of a microgrid system. So one really important thing that this represents is an improvement in accessibility. So as things get cheaper, greater populations in the US can have access to them. And so the idea is that by stimulating demand and having more people buy them, they become more accessible to wider and wider populations of people, is something that is going to be very important in the future. This is also a fun slide for me as a material scientist. I get to shout out a little bit of shout out some of the technology that has been researched here in Seattle at the Washington Clean Energy Test Beds. There's an organization called a research group that's spun into a company called Blue Dot Photonics that has created these things called quantum dots. And the idea is that all the waste infrared light that would have hit a solar panel that can't absorb that wavelength, these dots can absorb that wavelength and re-emit it out into wavelengths that the panel can absorb. And that can lead to like about a 10% increase in efficiency, which for how easy it is to make those quantum dots in large batches is a really substantial jump. So here, in Washington, here in Seattle, we're actually contributing to the research that's helping to make these panels more efficient and help to drive down prices. So that's just very fun for me to be able to talk about a little bit. And I think we're going to jump to the next slide and talk a little bit more about Seattle and what our power generation looks like. So when we think of Seattle, there's sort of the stereotype of Seattle as a rainy city. And so you have some people who might think like, well, if you're put in a place that has a lot more rain, like, isn't that sort of just competing with the hydropower? And we want to keep in mind that hydropower production is not constant across the entire year. And can we move to the next slide? Because we can see here that the hydropower production that we purchased from the Bonneville Power Administration, that's the BPA, the blue in this graph, dips, May to about July, August. And you might happen to know that that's actually peak production opportunity for solar power. So what we actually have here is an opportunity for solar and hydro to cover one another's weaknesses, because when we're running out of sort of the snowpack that really drives a lot of this hydropower, that's the time when solar is at peak production. So we have an opportunity to sort of shore up this weakness of hydropower that we see in a renewable way, which is very exciting.
So really quickly, I'm going to jump in and I just want to provide a little more context for everyone. So on this slide, as most of you know, Seattle City Light is a hydro municipal utility. So it's a power company that's owned by the city. We have 7 dams throughout the state. The blue ones up here are all the ones that we own. And then with that hydro plus wind, nuclear, and other renewable energy, Seattle has a 100% carbon-free electricity, which is incredibly rare and something that makes all this kind of work really, really important. And just to show a little bit more here, as Stowe was saying, that hydropower is a great resource, but as we move to a future with more electricity, we see high demand in the summer. And that's where, I don't know y'all, but it gets dark at 9 o'clock at night this time of year. And this is where solar really, really helps us. And just to drive home that fact that solar here in Seattle, especially this time of year, is really key to helping us reach our future goals. So with that, I'll just hand it back. Thanks, Stone.
Perfect. And I think we can jump to the next slide.
Yep.
So we're going to get a little bit more. Actually, hold up. One slide back, please. Perfect. So we're going to take a quick look at what Seattle, what we spend on emissions in Seattle right now. A huge part of that wheel is transportation, and a big part of that wheel is buildings. And fortunately, as we're about to see, this is something that is actually solar can be very, very effective at powering. So on the industrial and transportation side, we're doing things like switching to, from more traditional conventional furnaces to electric arc furnaces and electric cars. But today we're going to be focusing on providing power to buildings that solar panels are attached to, because if you're powering a building directly, you don't have to run it through transmission line. It's actually very, very efficient, very, very handy. So we can jump to the next slide and talk about electrification of buildings, because this is somewhere where solar power really shines. If you have a sort of a microgrid system, sort of a rooftop solar panel, and then all your different appliances that are using that electricity in your house, that you don't have to run it over transmission lines, so it's real efficient in terms of saving energy, but also from a logistical standpoint, it's very effective for not having to worry about overloading power lines, because you're running potentially overloading lines. It also helps make different neighborhoods more resilient in the face of power outages, just because it can be a little bit easier to have isolation and be able to prevent having to sort of brown out or black out large portions of a neighborhood. So very handy to have. We can see a couple of instances of appliances. Someone that I really want to shout out are HVAC and water heater systems, which can be really substantially contributors to our emissions, and we can fully electrify those. Also, electrical stoves, switching from gas to electrical stoves can be also a very effective way of cutting down emissions in a household. Yeah. And then we can jump to the next slide, talking about some of the other sort of general benefits we see. If you're using electricity from the wider grid, you get a lower bill, which is great. We have the concept of an urban heat island, which is that particularly in urban environments, buildings can soak up just a lot of heat. Like it becomes very hot in a city. I don't know if you've ever seen the musical In the Heights. That's fully a plot point. But one thing that solar power does is that when you're absorbing that sunlight, you're not, that's heat that would otherwise go, into the housing in the neighborhood that you are sort of helping to keep cool, which can, cut down on stroke in the midst of a heat wave, which is something we've actually struggled with in past summers recently in Seattle. So that's sort of another peripheral bonus. I can talk a little bit more in detail, but about resiliency, which is the idea that if you have a lot of solar microgrids in a neighborhood that can sort of communicate with the larger grid, you can be more judicious when you're sort of shutting down access to try to prevent brownouts or blackouts. And I see we have a question in the chat. I'm going to let Shelby address those questions after the presentation, because it's certainly not my area of expertise. And then, yeah, I want to say we have one more slide. Perfect. I just also want to address, as a material scientist, a talking point that I see pretty frequently, which is that we need to mine material to power the sort of the clean energy transition. And this is fully true, but I want to make sure that people keep in mind the orders of magnitude that we're talking about. So we have, sort of the quotation from this book here about the projection of needing 28 to 40 million tons of minerals for low carbon technology, which is a lot. That's a lot to mine. But that's predicted to be at the very peak of the transition from renewable energy to fossil fuels, from fossil fuels technology to renewable energy technology. So that is going to be when we are phasing out old technology as much as possible, introducing new technology as much as possible. That's where we're going to hit. And now every year, literally 3 orders of magnitude more than that, 15 billion tons of coal, oil, and gas every year. So just I want to, again, as a material scientist, this is something I think about a lot. A lot of my colleagues think about a lot. Yes, we're going to have to mine, particularly lithium, for example, cobalt, nickel. These are going to be important, but keep in context that it's, almost a thousandth in terms of volume compared to what we're already doing every year. So yeah, that's the little introduction that I'll give, and I'll hand it off to Shelby.
Thank you, Stone. Sorry. There was the question in the chat kind of about I think single family and different focuses. We'll dive into the IRA, but and most of the things we're going to talk about are on the commercial side. It's going to be nonprofits. Nonprofits or like commercial entities can use this incentives for, but I will touch on 2 consumer-facing programs. But just in like the high level kind of aggregate, driving home some of the things that Stone said, is that to move off fossil fuels, we have to electrify everything that we currently use for fossil fuels. So some of that is going to be the HVAC, like heat pumps, EVs, solar, combining that kind of all together. And we'll see the IRA is really focused on driving all of that. So with that said, let me jump on ahead. So the Inflation Reduction Act was passed in 2022, and it's The Congressional Budget Office projected that it's a $390 billion bill. That is the largest investment in climate ever, not just by the United States, by any country in the world. And the way that it's designed, it's really focused on the energy transition, which is moving us off of fossil fuels onto electric. And a lot of that work is through clean energy credits, which are designed to kind of speed up those trends of retiring fossil fuel power plants and replacing them with renewables, while also incentivizing the manufacturing of that equipment here in the United States and the purchase of different equipment, like EVs and heat pumps and solar and batteries, all here. And as you can see, the bill is really designed as a push and pull kind of economic policy. So the United States is going to fund a lot of factories, lots of EV factories, heat pumps factories, solar power factories, while also providing incentives for people to buy that equipment. And that's where it's really fun, is because you saw that downward trend of solar and batteries. This bill is really designed to speed that up and really drive down the cost of these equipment while also expanding their reach. And one of the really cool ways that the Congress has decided to expand that reach is by making these incentives available to nonprofits. We'll walk through some of the different incentives in here, but the main structure of how nonprofits take advantage of these is a system called direct pay. And the best way to describe it is they basically took the tax return mechanism and restructured it. So if anyone's who's used to getting a tax return, it's very similar to that. It's just kind of restructured a little bit differently. So a nonprofit, if you say you invest in a solar on your roof or solar on the parking lot, you design your project, you build your project, you get it connected to the grid, and then the year after that it's connected, you would put on your taxes. I'm assuming it'd probably be like a 990 form. You submit to the IRS like, we did this project. Can we have our money? There's a little bit more nuance to that, and we'll get into it. But in essence, it's a year after you install your clean energy project or the year after you buy your EVs. You tell the IRS and then they'll send you a check. And we'll get into some of the particulars of it. But for the clean energy, so if you're going to do solar, batteries, even a ground source heat pump, those kind of technologies, the base credit is 30%, and then there's some other additional ones, and we'll get into that next. So for the clean energy ones, this is going to be, like I said, solar, batteries, ground source heat pumps qualify for this too. The way it works is the base credit of 30% is available for all projects under 1 megawatt. 1 megawatt is very large. So most projects you're going to be working on, for, especially with y'all, are going to be underneath of that. So it's a little bit more flexible. That means you're guaranteed that 30%. And then if you use Made in America, if you use equipment made in America, you can get an additional 10% bonus, which will bring you up to 40. And then our area, we don't have any of the energy community bonuses. It's a little tricky nuance, but that same 10% bonus also qualifies for brownfield sites. So if you're a former brownfield site or contaminated, you can get an additional bonus, and you can layer these. And you see at the very top, there's another bonus for low-income residential buildings and low-income communities. And we'll dive a little bit more into what that means. But those first two are stackable and easier to get, and that can bring you up to 50% right there. Oops, sorry, wrong button. So there's the bonuses, the low-income bonuses, like I was saying. The way that these bonuses work is much more like a grant. So you would design your project, build your project, and then you apply additionally for them. And that works if you're doing a community solar project where at least 50% of the benefits, which are usually bill credits, are going to LMI customers that you usually in a community solar model, they subscribe into it. If you're building a system like that, you can apply for the additional 20% bonus. If your project is on a subsidized affordable housing building, you can apply for that additional credit. And if you're in any of these purple areas, you can apply for an additional bonus, the additional 20% bonus as well. Now, that additional bonus is limited every year, so it's not always guaranteed. Whereas that 30% is 10% for a Made in America, and if you happen to be on a brownfield, you can get that extra. It's a little complicated, but if you have, I can dive into it a little bit after if you have any more questions. So switching from the clean energy to the chargers. This is what everyone always gets a little excited about is chargers. Where do we get chargers? How do we get funding for chargers? So there is a tax credit within the IRA for chargers. It's called the 30C Alternative Fuel Credit. It's very much the same way as the clean energy credits we were just talking about, where it's 30% of the charger cost up to $100,000, and that's per charger. Now, where it gets a little wonky is this credit is only available in certain census tracts. And for us, this is the map of where those census tracts are. I know this isn't quite lined up with St. Mark's, but you could see a lot of it's on the south side for us. And that's for City Light, we're really trying to focus from an equity standpoint of how we get chargers into the public area. So for us, we're really excited about this one because we can take advantage of these credits as well. But for any nonprofit in Seattle that happens to be in one of these census tracts, they're eligible for this 30% as well. And then, oh, I don't have the slide, sorry. I'm missing one slide. On the EV side, this is the other one that everyone always gets really excited about. So for EVs, there is a $7,500 tax credit. And for nonprofits, the way that works is you would purchase the EV, and then you tell the IRS that following year that we purchased this EV, here's the VIN number, and then you will get a check back. Seattle City Light worked with, I worked with the city, other departments, and we were one of the first ones to get in our EV credits. And we're going to get, I think about $300,000 back this year from our purchase from EVs. So that's a really good one. If you're looking to buy a van or something, that's an easy one. And then, as I said at the beginning, there are two consumer-facing programs to talk about. One is the $7,500 tax credit for EVs that I think most people are familiar with. What's exciting about that one is starting this year, that becomes a direct coupon, like you can use as part of your down payment. So anybody who wants to go buy an EV, there are certain Made in America requirements. You can see there's a trend there. But if it qualifies and you go to the dealer, you purchase the EV, that credit is applied at the point of sale, and you don't have to do your tax. You don't have to go back to your taxes for it. The other one to mention for homeowners is the 30% credit for solar that I think a lot of people are probably familiar with. That one's been around for a very long time. Traditional, you install the solar in your house, you put it on your taxes. Where it is exciting is now you can use that for batteries. So if you already have a solar system and you want to do batteries, you can use that credit. Or if you want to do a combo solar battery installation, you can use the credit for both of them. Now I'm going to move on to a slightly wonkier, if you can believe me, topic called 179D, which is a tax deduction for energy efficiency retrofit projects. And this deduction has been around for about 20 years. But what's exciting is the IRA has changed it so it's easier for nonprofits to access, and they've made it to where it's much more of a whole building approach to energy efficiency upgrades, and it can be used repeatedly, or it can be used every 3 years. So this project, or this credit, will cover any energy efficiency project that takes a whole building approach. So if you have a building and you're like, all right, we want to replace the natural gas boiler, the heat pump, we need to do some weatherization, we need to seal the building up. You have to take a holistic approach to the building, and using a modeling software, you have to be able to show that you reduce the energy by 25%. Where it gets a little wonky is that sounds simple, but the modeling that the IRA requires is from 2007. here in Seattle, our energy code is very strict, and most of our buildings far exceed that. So the reason I bring that up is it's not a straight 25% energy reduction from what you're using right now. It's based off an older model. And while that's a little wonky, what it means is our buildings here in Seattle have much more leeway, that it's much easier to reach that reduction target, that number, because our buildings are already efficient and they're using an old modeling software. I know that's kind of complicated and I can dive into more detail, but you say it should be easier for our buildings to reach that 25%. And like I said, you have to take the whole building. It's not just, you can't just do one component, it has to be a whole building reduction. And what's exciting is if you can meet that 25% savings, you can get up to $2.50 per square foot. And it goes up. It's a sliding scale. As you reduce your energy usage further, you can get all the way up to $5 a square foot. And for nonprofits, I'm going to jump ahead here because this can be a little dense. Sorry, y'all.
Hey, Shelby, can I jump
yeah.
in with a question before you move on?
Yes, please.
Does I put this question in the chat. Does Seattle City Light do that calculation for nonprofits, or is that something we have to figure out how to do?
Yeah, so that is I just asked this question actually the other day, so thank you. And from my understanding, the modeling that we do probably won't qualify. But what I am going to do at the end of this is I'm going to drop the link for a webinar that we held with a local tax firm that dives into much more detail of all this. And from my understanding, there's going to be there's tax lawyers and there's going to be contractors that can help you explain how the process works and work you through the modeling. And yes, I wish there was something we had, but not at the moment. So going back to how we can monetize this. So the way that it works for nonprofits, if you do the energy efficiency project, you meet those modeling requirements, you work with a contractor, and what you do is you transfer your deduction to them. And they take that deduction and they basically they can reduce their tax load, and then they can give you a deduction off your overall bill. So you qualify for the deduction, they get to take that off their taxes, and then whatever amount you agree to comes off the bill for the entire project. I hope that makes sense. But with that, I'm going to stop and I'm going to open up questions, and I'm sure we can dive a little bit more into the 179D because it is a little bit complicated. So I'm going to stop sharing so I can see everybody. Please ask questions. I feel like that was a lot I just threw at everybody.
Shelby, I was just going to say to Allie's question about how to do these measurements, the Seattle OEM has actually been helping us do that kind of comprehensive building assessment as a starting place for the Clean Building Accelerator program that we have signed on to be a part of, to try to get to a clean building threshold of improvements by the early 2030s. And so so we have some of that rating factors already in hand.
Oh, that's great to hear. I know we're currently in the process of evaluating the 179D deduction and figuring out how do we align all of our incentives and make sure that it all kind of lines up, so people for nonprofits and commercial entities are using the deduction, trying to make sure that all of our programs line up. It's just it takes a little bit of time, but we're working on that. So thank you.
I'll just add, Shelby, this is Allie again, that I work in this space and have heard Ira explain many times, and I think you did an amazing job breaking down something that is very complex but has a lot of opportunity built in.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. That's nice. That's important. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of the silence on these, so just gonna keep talking on some and give some more details. So in particular with the one of the other things I wanted to point out with those clean energy credits, they're good for 10 years. But one of the caveats of that is if we get to 2020, if we get to 2032 and greenhouse gas emissions from the power sector have not reduced, have not dropped by 75%, those credits will stay going indefinitely until we hit those targets. So that adds a lot of stability to the credit market, and it makes it much easier for organizations like yours to be able to plan and really kind of think about how do we, we want to do this project now, but we know that we can use these credits and kind of building out, stuff like that. Same thing with the EV tax credits. Those are good until 2032. And the structures are all set up right now. And the IRS has some really helpful resources to really kind of walk people through how to use them. Yeah.
Maybe a question for Steve. Are we thinking about putting any EV charging stations on our site?
We have an EV charging station in this. I don't know if Ruth Mulligan is still on the line, but it has two plug-in units. It's a dual unit, and it was made as a memorial gift to Ruth Mulligan's late husband, Jim Mulligan, who was one of the founders of Earth Ministry, a nonprofit in the region, and longtime leaders in environmental justice and in creation care ministries here at St. Mark's. So shout out to Ruth, who was on earlier, but I think has dropped off.
I have a question about the stability of the credits. Does that hold no matter what happens politically?
That is the question that's probably honestly the question I get asked the most. What I can say is it would be hard. So the way that the IRA was passed, if anyone wants to get really wonky into how it was passed, it's a budget reconciliation bill, which means that Congress only needs 51 votes to change it. There is the Trump tax cuts are up for debate next year, so there is a chance of reopening the tax code. Yeah, that's it's like everything else right now, we don't know. It's just cross your fingers and hope.
Well, it might put a premium on not delaying.
Yeah, and also, to be honest with you, for me, this is just trying to get the word out, to get people to understand how important this is, to understand that we have an incredible opportunity to really address our emissions and really, really ratchet down emissions. Well, also, I grew up in the Rust Belt, so seeing factories reopen and seeing Americans go back to work in car factories, and I'll give you an example. One of my favorites is there's this really innovative new battery that uses rust to store electricity. It's amazing. It's called Form Energy. They're using IRA tax credits to build a factory on top of an old steel mill in West Virginia.
All right.
And they're hiring 700 people from the town. And like that kind of stuff is where
That's fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's where it's like it's going to take a long time, but if we can keep this thing going, the hope is you can get real political buy-in. And really, there's a lot of EV factories getting opened in Tennessee and Kentucky and Georgia. A lot of places like that are benefiting. So fingers crossed.
Shelby, Richard Wesley has his hand up.
Yeah.
So Richard, you can unmute and ask your question.
Yeah. One of the things I've often wondered about the cathedral, I've been electrifying my house, and one of the things I wanted to do was put in a ground source heat pump because that works better, but we had to abandon that because they couldn't get the truck in our driveway to do the drilling. But St. Mark's has a huge parking lot. And I was just wondering if anyone had looked at doing geothermal heating, because the difference between the using geothermal and air source is that the ground has a very stable temperature. Air source heat pumps, once you get down to like occasionally we have a cold snap in the winter, it gets far less efficient. But if you're using a ground source, that's not really a problem. And it would be really easy to drill holes in that parking lot for the wells. So I don't know if anyone's discussed that or rejected already for reasons that aren't obvious to me. Just asking.
Richard, yeah, I would say we have investigated. It's not been rejected, but it's also not front burner. And the reason is that when we have investigated, it's been a few years, but when we investigated it, and actually the consultant actually suggested probably on the front lawn doing the drilling more than the parking lot for reasons I don't fully understand. But be that as it may, it was a premium of about $1.5 million for the new heat pump system or VRF system that we would look at. That if we move from just a straight electric to a ground source geothermal, it would be an additional $1.5 million. And I think that is really just something that the will of the parish community needs to express itself. And if they, meaning we, are willing to pay for that premium, then it certainly would make great sense. But without that forthcoming in a capital campaign, I don't see it happening.
Yeah.
If I can make one comment, and I guess kind of a question too on that. Don't ask me exactly the particulars of how this works, but I do know, and lawyers have told me this is true, that you could use that 30% credit for a ground source heat pump. It's a weird quirk of the tax code that because technically you're producing energy because you're tapping into the earth, it qualifies as a clean energy project. And then if you use Made in America pieces, which I'm not sure exactly, you'd have to work with somebody else to do that, like a tax professional, you could potentially get 40% of that paid for. So that is possibility. And then also I would be curious if because I know you all have been thinking about affordable housing, if you could tie those together, would be really interesting to see. Yes, they can confirm it is a real thing.
Yeah. It's a great question, Richard, and I think we ought to keep it before us as we're laying the groundwork for this capital campaign and then capital project to follow.
Mm-hmm. And one other perk of that is that direct pay for the ground source would be an easier monetary structure than the 179D, but you could combine them together. I'm sure there's a way that you could layer them together to get some sort of funding for both, but you have to work with a tax professional.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I'd be curious to ask too, do you all have any vans, or do you think about electrifying vans or any kind of other fleet vehicles like that?
We have some people whose middle name is Van, like Van Wessep or Van Valen, but no, we don't have vans.
I was just asking because Ford is coming out with Ford and both Dodge are coming out with new vans that are electric vans that we're very excited about. Yeah.
While I was sitting here, I actually answered one of my own questions, and I thought I'd pass it on because it wasn't immediately obvious from the Seattle City Light website, which is you're talking about the new charge stations that are all over the place. There's one near me, and I'm always like, well, how do I pay? It turns out it's hooked up to Shell Recharge app. Okay, because that's not obvious.
I believe so. I
just went and looked. I have that app, and I went and looked, and it's there. But I don't know if that's the only way. But yeah,
I want to say so. I don't know 100%, but I believe there's like a QR code because there's actually one outside my apartment building, and I see people using it all the time. So I believe it's like a QR code, and then you scan with that app, and then it drops down. It's a really cool system, and we're rolling those out. I think we've got about 20 or 30 of them. And we're going to be rolling more of those out over the year. And if anyone hasn't seen them, they're these really cool, like they look like transformers. They sit on top of the pole, and then you go through that process, and it drops the cord down, and you just plug your car in.
I appreciate the fact that you're spooling the cord out, because I've been to stations where thieves have just removed the copper cables.
Yeah.
I find terrifying considering how much power is involved, but apparently they know how to do it.
I don't know either, but they're much less susceptible to vandalism. Yes. Oh. And they're easier. They're just easier to get into the streets. There's a lot of demand for charging, so it's a hot topic right now.
So let me ask a question of everyone here, St. Markins. Would you raise your hand if you think, as we are looking, as the vestry is looking toward what a capital project that's looking at our infrastructure and electrification process, would you be interested in us exploring solar as a part of that solution? Raise your hand. If that interests you. Yeah. All right. And would you be interested in geothermal if we could figure out how to patch these incentives together in order for that to happen? Raise your hand. Yeah. All right. And would you be interested in helping me and other leaders at St. Mark's tackle these details? Yep. All right. I see. Wait, folks are jumping around. I see Richard and Allie and Stone and Doug and Jan, Judy, Nancy.
I just don't know what I can contribute, but if I can, I will.
Okay. All right. Let me write those names down here.
In the book of life.
This was not part of the plan, but I figured, wow, we've got we've got some interest here. So good. So let me just make sure. Stone, Richard, Doug and Judy, Nancy, and Allie.
Stone and I popped our emails in chat, Steve, just to make it easier.
Yeah, that'd be great. Wonderful. Excellent. All right. That doesn't commit you to a lifelong burden of enslavement on a committee, but I'd be delighted for that help from people who are really invested in it. I think it would be really wonderful for us to explore it. And Shelby, you told me in one of our meetings several months ago, as we started this conversation that has come to tonight, I asked you, how did you decide to get in this line of work? How did you end up in Seattle with Seattle City Light as this person who is talking with nonprofits like ours?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, as I said, I grew up in the Midwest, in the Rust Belt. I started off as a welder in skilled trades. I ended up in New York. Long story, but I ended up in New York doing housing organizing and working in public housing in New York that had been disinvested in, and a lot of issues around mold and heating and cooling. And it really got me focused in just buildings and how we make buildings better. And I realized from there that the making your buildings better is also a climate solution. And I just got kind of sucked into the climate world. And the rest, where's the rest? I'm originally from Missouri. My whole family worked in the auto plants. So yeah, Missouri, yeah, St. Louis actually. So for me, it was what struck me was these things that we talk about, these technologies. We have an opportunity to not just address climate change, but to address social justice issues to address massive disinvestment in housing and jobs. Like it's a solution that kind of touches all across everything. And for me, it was just as soon as I figured it out, it was off to the races. So my background is like in community organizing, and I love being able to get out there and just kind of preach and talk about this stuff. And it's just I'll end it on one of the things is, and I want to hopefully you get from this is we always hear with climate change this doom and gloom, this kind of oppressive, like, how do we do this? And once you actually see that there are solutions out there and the solutions are really good, to me it makes I'm optimistic for the future. I want to I want to breathe the air in 2035. I want to see what the water is like, is we can do this. And it's fun being part of a bigger movement. So yeah, thank you, Dean, for letting me.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Shelby. And Stone, tell us what you're planning to do with your graduate degree in this manufacturing and development.
Yeah, so it's still a little bit up in the air. There's some companies called Helion and Avalanche Energy that I think are really exciting. And sort of it's kind of almost a controversial thing because they are very like high risk in terms of as a field. It's very much in the nuclear fusion space. It is a product that does not exist. It has not been necessarily confirmed to be possible on Earth, but yeah. So nuclear fusion, the motto's been it's always been 20 years away. But I'm working on some stuff with superconducting material science right now. I think it could be really beneficial for moving forward the field just a little bit. And I think it's going to be a good skill set to sort of participate in that research. I think it's extremely interesting, and it's cool to be, doing something that, if it works, will like really tremendously change the entire world forever. So that's sort of something that draws me to it a little bit. But I'm also very cognizant of the fact that I try to be a little bit of a realist, and it's not necessarily possible. And so I'd love to do like helpful stuff on the side, while I'm working on that. So just help where I can. And then, yeah, so nuclear fusion is something I'm very interested in, but, there's also many different kinds of manufacturing, that I feel are open to me too. So we'll see how it all shakes out.
Wonderful. Thanks for sharing that. And thank you both for your witness and commitment to seeing this globe through. Rich, I don't know if there are other things before. I think I was asked to close in a prayer.
Yeah, just making sure there are not any unanswered questions. Looks like we did address everything in the chat. Were there any final questions before we wrap up? Thank you very much to both of our speakers for your time and your expertise and your willingness to put together such a wonderful presentation that, for a layperson like me, was quite understandable. I know a lot more than I did before. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think that's it, Steve.
Yeah,
it looks like there is a new message.
Well, I just put in, for folks here, if you're not
Great.
aware of it, that we are in the application process of a search for a new part-time position, climate justice coordinator and cathedral grant writer. And if you know of someone who might be interested in that, it's not a full-time, it's a part-time 1 to 2 days a week, then send this link. It's the St. Mark's website. You drop down to employment and the job description's there. So share the word out. All right. I want to say, adding my word of thanks to Rich's for gratitude for Shelby and Stone and for all of you being present. Yeah, Stone, sorry, go ahead.
Would you like me? I know there are just a couple university listservs, so if you want to try to engage the sort of the student population in the in trying to get somebody for that grant writing position, I'd be happy to sort of circulate that link.
You bet. Yeah, go for it.
Will do.
The more the merrier. Thank you. So gratitude for Shelby and Stone and for everyone being present here. Reminder, next Wednesday night, same time on Zoom, 7 p.m. is a special parish forum updating on the affordable housing project. And there's been some significant developments in recent weeks that we're looking forward to share, as we did to the vestry last night. So commend that to you. All right, let us close in prayer. Gracious God, it is with a sense of delight in your creation that we turn our focus to our part in caring for it. You call us into that role as stewards and even co-creators, and certainly companions with all of creation. We are bound together, and this night we know our bonds of affection in a church community in which we trust that you are our guide and the source of all, and the source of goodness instilled in all, including us. And with that blessing, may we go this night our separate ways, knowing of your peace which surpasses all human understanding. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thanks, everyone.